if you have a lot of experiences, you'll have a few bad ones. Now, the tough part about it is that essentially there is no one, virtually with the exception of an assassin, that can do you as much damage as somebody can in the press if they do it something the wrong way. There are there are other people out there that, and that may be innocent or it may be intentional, depends on the circumstances. There may be doctors out there doing just much harm, but you initiate the transaction. I mean, you go see the guy, and you may even sign a consent form on what he does. There may be lawyers that do you way more trouble, but by and large, you have the ability to opt in or opt out of the transaction. You walk in the furniture market, you may get a bad experience. Most of the time, you get a good experience, but you do not have the option in the news business of opting out of the story. You can decide how you're going to behave in relationship to it, but you can't opt out of it. So if you do get the worst of either human nature or reporting skills or something, there's no way that you won't be a participant. And that's an unusual arrangement in society. One person that has a similar power, but again, largely involves somebody else initiating, federal prosecutor or any kind of prosecutor has the decision to prosecute or not prosecute. The very fact they prosecute is it has done a lot of damage whether you're innocent or not finally. And so that person has the power simply by initiating something to cause you all kinds of trouble, no matter how innocent you may be or anything else. But that isn't used that extensively. The news business has that power. It's the nature of it. You can't get away from it, but it is the nature of it. And the other unusual aspect, of course, of the news business, the newspaper business particularly, is that unlike in my grandfather's day, there are 1,600 plus daily papers in the United States, and essentially, with exceptions you can almost count on one hand, there are no competing papers. And the reason, of course, is that the essential economics of the business drive it toward one newspaper per city or town or metropolitan area. Nothing evil about it or anything of the sort. It's what Tom Winship used to call survival of the fattest. And eventually, there is no red ribbon in the newspaper race. There's a huge blue ribbon, which makes it enormously valuable. And if you come in second, you don't come in. And there's virtually no business like that in the country. If you had 1,600 towns, each with one hamburger stand, each with one bank, each with one woman's shoe store, each with whatever it may be, there would be competition that would come in against them. The guy that runs the best shoe store in the country or the best hamburger chain in the country would look at the town with the worst, and he would come in on top of it. But it doesn't happen in the newspaper business. I mean, 10 years ago, everybody talked about how terrible the Manchester Union Leader was when Loeb was running it. And they said it was the worst newspaper in the country, is shame, brag, etc. But all these great news organizations with enormous resources, money coming out of their ears, would have dreamt of putting another paper in Manchester, New Hampshire, because they would have gotten their ears pinned back. And they knew it. So they said, we can put out a wonderful newspaper, and Bill Loeb puts out a terrible newspaper, but they didn't want to try and compete with them, because it doesn't lend itself to competition. And therefore, you essentially have a business that will make a lot of money if you're terrific. It'll make a lot of money if you're lousy. And there's no difference. I mean, you pick a paper that you tell me you think is lousy, and I will show you one with 30% profit margins. And people always used to laugh at Roy Thompson, and he never saw the Council Bluffs non-pro his lifetime. I met him over in London. I asked him one time if he'd ever been to Council Bluffs. Never been there. But he knew the figures, as he said. And I don't have any feelings about that at all, but a lot of people knocked Thompson newspapers in those years, but they had the highest profit margins. And all these people that wanted to say excellence produces profitability and we're very rich because we're very good, it doesn't hold water, because on that basis Thompson was the best of them all. And there is no correlation between profits and excellence. So that means that how good a newspaper is depends entirely on the wishes of its owner. Very interesting phenomenon. There's really nothing quite like that in American business. I mean, if you set up a hamburger stand, you turn out lousy hamburgers, McDonald's is going to be next to you or whomever, and you won't be around a year later. I mean, competition if you give terrible service in a business, or prices are too high, or anything else, you will be put out of business by somebody else, unless you have a regulated monopoly. But then your profits are limited. If you have a electric light company or phone company or something. Newspaper business, you are as good as you want to be, and you're as bad as you want to be. And there are 1,600 papers, and there's a wide variety of excellence among those papers, but there is no correlation between excellence and profitability. That's something that publishers hate to talk about. And maybe it's a good idea not to talk about it, because if you can whip up the troops all the time and tell them the only way we're going to stay alive is if you guys are terrific, probably a good myth to perpetuate. But it's not borne out. Yeah.
Would you apply those same thoughts to television journalism? When will the essential economics of the business create one television station, one television news organization?
The interesting thing about television is you take 100 top markets in the country, and I have, and you look at who leads in the nightly news broadcast, the network nightly news broadcast, you will find that not so many years ago it was 100 out of 100, but I will bet that it's 95 out of 100, that whoever leads, whether it's Brokaw or Rather or Jennings, will be whoever leads the local news before that. And in other words, it's the feed-in that counts. ABC in New York, in Philadelphia, we had as great an audience for Jennings, probably still do, but I know we did in the past, as Rather and Brokaw combined. But we had this terrific feed-in from the local news before. Single most important factor. Tough on the anchorman's ego, but it happens to be true. Now, what's the biggest factor in what local news is watching? It's the feed-in before. That's why you want to have Oprah. I mean, it's dynamite to have the feed-in from a 40 share or something like that coming from Oprah. You say, well, this is all circular. You know, you're going to have trouble at some point. Incidentally, Good Morning America and the morning show on NBC used to get a benefit from a feed-in from people leaving the dials on Carson from the previous evening, and it's amazing. Somebody must have set their dial one time where they wanted it, and just kept going around the clock. But ABC, Cap City's ABC, is #1 in local news in every market they're in. And they're in New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Houston, Fresno, Raleigh, Durham, to go down the line. And you know, it's hard for me to figure out exactly why that is, except those guys are terribly smart programmers. I mean, they're dynamite. And they also, in Buffalo, there's a fellow I remember once that's been on the ABC affiliate there for 30 years. People do build up real followings. That's why an anchor person who is drawing, particularly in a larger city, a huge audience is worth a lot more than anybody on the newspaper. It's kind of sad for those of us who like newspapers, but you can be the world's greatest, you can be Bart Rowan or whoever it may be, you can be the world's greatest newspaper writer, and you can't make a fraction of what an anchor person can make that draws an extra share point or two on the news in LA or New York. When I watch those local news shows in those bigger cities, I have trouble seeing the difference myself, but you know, whether it's, and I know during the sweeps period that, you know, we jazz them up, and obviously I've seen it done, and so you have to come to the conclusion that jazzing them up works. It doesn't have any effect on newspapers. The newspaper and television business are two fundamentally different businesses, because basically people only want to read one newspaper a day. Whereas the television is, and you can't attract them by offering it for 20 cents instead of 25 cents or 15 cents. I mean, when you've gone through a paper, 9 people out of 10 don't want to read a second paper. But with the television station, of course, you can jump from station to station. Now, if the television set had developed like the VCR, so you had to make a decision between VHS and beta, you literally had to go with one format or another. Let's say when you bought your television set, let's say technology forced you to only buy one channel. Now, would you have 12 television sets around at, you know, $1,000 each, you know, and go from set to set? If the world had developed that way, you would have had one network become preeminent and really drive the others out of business, because you would have gotten, again, a survival of the fattest type thing, where once as it happened in VCRs where the VHS format got far enough ahead of the beta, it puts the other out of business. But essentially, with television, you can roam among newspapers, and you can do it very easily. And they're just sitting there. You don't have to move, you don't have to buy another product or anything else, and that creates a whole different dynamic. It's an awfully good business, but it's a different dynamic.
Question over here.
Yeah.